Of all the bloody wars our country has waged in its brief history, by far the deadliest to Americans was our own Civil War. Over 750,000 died in the conflict, more than the First World War and the Second World War combined. Brother killed brother, neighbor killed neighbor, and friends suddenly were seen as enemies to be slaughtered. This is true of every war, of course, but nowhere is this shocking reality more blatantly visible than in a civil war. It is here that we see most clearly both the absurdity and the horror of war. It is also in such nightmares that the spirit can be shaken awake and heroes can be born. The morning of December 14th, 1862, was bitter cold at Fredericksburg, Virginia, the site of one of the biggest and bloodiest battles of the war. For days already, 200,000 soldiers had been engaged in horrific battle at a place known as Marye's Heights. Between the lines, the dead of both sides lay unburied, and the dying lay wailing in agonizing pain and thirst. The impassioned pleas for water, water, reduced all the dying men to their common humanity, or rather elevated them to that common humanity no matter the color of their uniform. A 19-year-old Confederate soldier by the name of Sergeant Richard Kirkland heard those terrible cries, and the anguish of the dying men pierced his heart. Most of these cries were emanating from the throats of those he had been taught to regard as enemies, but their cries haunted him nonetheless. His heart was ready to burst, and he could stand it no longer. Desperate to do something, he ran to his superior, General Joseph Kershaw, who years later recorded what happened then. "General," said Kirkland, "I can't stand this. All night and all day I have heard those poor people crying for water, and I can stand it no longer. I come to ask permission to go and give them water." The general looked at him with deep admiration and said, "Don't you know that you would get a bullet through your head the moment you stepped over the wall?" "Yes, sir," he replied, "I know that. But if you will let me, I am willing to try." The general reluctantly gave permission, but refused to allow him to carry a white flag. The boy would be on his own. Filling canteens with water, Sergeant Kirkland walked bravely onto the battlefield to the first dying enemy soldier he saw. The general describes what happened next. He knelt beside him, tenderly raised the drooping head, and poured the precious life-giving fluid down the fever-scorched throat. This done, he laid him tenderly down, placed his knapsack under his head, straightened out his broken limb, spread his overcoat over him, replaced his empty canteen with a full one, and turned to another sufferer. By this time his purpose was well understood on both sides, and all danger was over. From all parts of the field arose fresh cries of "Water, water, for God's sake, water!" More piteous still, the mute appeal of some who could only feebly lift a hand to say there too was life and suffering. For an hour and a half did this ministering angel pursue his labor of mercy, nor cease to go and return until he relieved all the wounded on that part of the field. He returned to his post, wholly unhurt. Who shall say how sweet his rest that winter's night beneath the cold stars? So wrote the general. If you go to the scene of that terrible battle in Virginia, you will find a large bronze monument to this hero of mercy. A life-size sergeant bends over a wounded enemy soldier, supporting his head on his knee while giving him water from a canteen and clasping his hand as if in brotherhood. The inscription reads, "At the risk of his life, this American soldier of sublime compassion brought water to his wounded foes at Fredericksburg. The fighting men on both sides of the line called him the Angel of Marye's Heights." In the annals of that dark chapter of our history, this moment stands out as the brightest of lights, piercing our hearts in no less poignant a manner than the cries of the dying enemies pierced his. That hour and a half of heroic mercy should have silenced all guns, abolished all wars, and killed for all time the lie that a different color of uniform or a different color of skin makes an enemy. That hour and a half should have opened our eyes to see the brother in the enemy rather than the enemy in the brother. Sadly, neither the hour and a half on Marye's Heights nor the 3 hours on Calvary's Hill were able to penetrate the hardened hearts of a hate-filled humanity. But one heart was moved that day in Virginia. And when that heart was moved to action, the hearts of many were opened to receive an enemy's love as their grateful lips received the drops of water. And when the soldiers, trained to kill, trained to hate, witnessed dumbfoundedly this unbelievable spectacle of pure love, and not one of them fired a shot at this angel of mercy, it is impossible to believe that they too did not begin to love a little more. From another hill far away, we hear ancient words of wisdom and mercy and love. Love your enemies. Do good to them. Give, expecting nothing in return. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Rarely have these words been so eloquently echoed as in the quiet trickle of soothing water from a young man's canteen.